Dear listeners, once again, welcome back to Lost Relation Chronicles. And today we bring another story for you, a fine one, a comedic one, uh, as comedic as it is possible based on the guidelines. This is a fictional story, so any resemblance to living and death are purely coincidental. Let's start with today's story.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Chapter 1 Speedrunning the American Dream. I met Hannah in the copy room. It wasn't a scene out of a movie. It was just two exhausted people in a windowless room that smelled of ozone and cheap toner. She was staring at a paper jam like she was contemplating arson. "It's the tray," I said, stepping in. "You have to jiggle it, then slam it. This machine only responds to mild aggression." She stepped back, laughing as the printer finally groaned back to life. I was about to throw my stapler at it. "You just saved a life." We started eating lunch together in the break room. We didn't talk about our souls or our childhood traumas. We bonded over the shared misery of corporate life, the terrible parking, the coworkers who microwave fish, and the fact that every email from management felt like it was written by a robot trying to pass for human. I liked how straightforward she was. In a city full of people trying to hustle their way into a better life, Hannah felt like a place where I could finally stop running. The relationship moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. We were dating in a month, living together in 6, and married in a year. "Don't you think you're rushing this?" my friend Owen asked at the bachelor party, nursing a beer that cost more than my first car. "You barely know her favorite movie, and you're already sharing a mortgage." "Speed is just efficiency with a ring on it," I told him. I was 29 and convinced that life was just a series of checkboxes. I had the girl, the 401k, and a life that felt pre-approved by society. I didn't want to wait for the sake of waiting. 3 months into the marriage, I came home to find Hannah sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching a plastic stick like a winning lottery ticket she wasn't sure she wanted to cash. "I'm pregnant," she said. My legs gave out. I sat on the floor, my back against the dresser. "Are you okay?" We're doing this." "We're doing this," she said, her voice steady. I spent that night staring at the ceiling while she slept. I felt a weight in my chest that was half terror and half purpose. I decided right then that I was going to be the premium edition father. No missed recitals, no broken promises. I was going to be the dad I didn't have. The next morning, I rebranded my entire life. I wasn't Caleb, the marketing associate. I was the provider. Overtime wasn't a grind. It was college fund seed money. A minivan wasn't a death sentence for my ego. It was a tactical family transport. Sleep was just a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I bought parenting books I never had time to read and practiced dad jokes like I was prepping for a stand-up special. "Hey, Mark," I said to a coworker, leaning over his cubicle. "Why don't scientists trust atoms?" Mark didn't look up from his screen. "I have a deadline, Caleb." "Because they make up everything." I barked, laughing alone while Mark contemplated a call to HR. I was all in. I talked to the ultrasound screen like I was giving a pep talk to a star athlete. Hannah watched all this with a smile I interpreted as adoration. I didn't know that while I was painting the nursery a soft, trustworthy blue, she was busy mentally deleting a 3-week collaborative project with Trent Wilcox from finance. Trent Wilcox, a man whose name sounded like he owned a boat and had opinions on craft beer. Hannah filed the affair away as an inconsequential variance. She treated it like a typo in an annual report, something you just ignore until the auditor shows up. I was building a cathedral of domestic bliss on a foundation of premium-grade lies. I thought I had cracked the code to a perfect life. I didn't realize I was just a temporary contractor, paying full price for a lease that was about to be terminated with extreme prejudice. I lay awake at night, thinking, I'm going to be the best dad this kid ever had. The universe, apparently, was in the back of the room, holding its breath and waiting for the punchline. Chapter 2, 18 Years of Premium Subscription Fatherhood.
So, have you ever met a person who has microwaved a fish?
No, not yet.
Pray to God you don't have to meet somebody like that. Let's go ahead.
Time passed the way subscriptions do, quietly, automatically, and with monthly charges I didn't question because the service seemed essential. Lydia grew up. I paid up. It started with nights on the floor beside her crib, whispering to a baby who didn't understand English that I would always be there. I learned the taxonomy of screams, the "I'm hungry" wail, the "I'm scared" whimper, and the "I've discovered my own lungs and I'm impressed" screech. Hannah slept through most of it. We called that balance. By the time Lydia could walk, my knees had memorized the exact texture of every rug in the house. By the time she could talk, my name had transitioned from a person to a function. Dad juice. Dad, shoes. Dad, I can't find my other sock. I became the sock retrieval department, the emergency services division, the emotional IT desk. At preschool pickup, the other moms looked at me with that patronizing warmth people usually reserve for a golden retriever carrying a stick. You're such a good dad, a woman named Carol said once while I was wiping applesauce off Lydia's chin with the surgical precision of a bomb tech. I wanted to tell her that this was just the minimum viable product of fatherhood, but I just nodded like I'd personally discovered the cure for colic. The rituals stacked up like a game of Tetris. Every year, we had the same chocolate cake because Lydia decided at age for that cocoa was a personality trait. There were school plays where she'd forget her lines and stare at me in the third row like I was a human teleprompter. There were the scraped knees that required the same three-act play, exaggerated concern, a Band-Aid with a licensed character on it, and the sacred phrase, "You're okay, I've got you." "I'm okay, I've got you," she would repeat, testing the spell. "You are," I'd say, "and I do." I made deals with the universe. If she finished her broccoli, I'd let her pick the movie. If she practiced piano, I'd sit through the recital and clap like I was witnessing the second coming of Mozart. I became fluent in the dialect of encouragement, even when I was exhausted enough to see double. At night, I lay in bed and ran spreadsheets in my head. College fund, emergency fund, the fund for emergencies that the emergency fund was too embarrassed to handle. I built financial redundancy like I was prepping for a small, domestic apocalypse. "Do we really need to save this much?" Hannah asked once, looking at my laptop screen like the numbers had personally insulted her family lineage. "We don't need to," I said. "We should." She shrugged and went back to her book. "You worry too much, Caleb." I did. I worried professionally. It was my primary contribution to the household. When Lydia hit middle school, the conversations changed shape. It was less "Dad, I fell," and more "Dad, you don't get it." I learned to nod at problems I didn't understand and offer advice I knew would be deleted upon arrival. "I hate math," she announced one night, stabbing a carrot. "Math hates you too," I said, "but you still have to coexist. It's like having a weird roommate." Hannah rolled her eyes. "Don't discourage her, Caleb." "I'm not discouraging," I said. "I'm preparing her for a life of mutual resentment." Lydia laughed. I counted that as a win. In those days, a teenage laugh was worth more than my year-end bonus. From the outside, we were a functioning unit. From the inside, we were a machine that only ran because I spent every waking hour oiling the gears. People told me I was involved. The guidance counselor called me a pillar. "I'm just here," I'd tell them. What I didn't realize was that being just here was the infrastructure. The family lived on my presence the way a skyscraper lives on its load-bearing walls. I assumed I was part of the blueprints. I didn't know I was just the scaffolding. Hannah worked late sometimes. I worked late more. When Lydia had nightmares, she came to my side of the bed. When she needed help with an essay on the Great Depression, she came to me. When she needed $50 for a field trip, it came from the account I managed like a sacred trust. "Dad, can I?" "Yes," I'd say, usually before she finished the sentence. It was a reflex. Approval. Coverage. Support. There was no dramatic deception in our house. No whispered phone calls or mysterious receipts. Hannah's secret didn't require maintenance because I was doing all the emotional labor. The truth stayed buried because the surface was so perfectly stable. I mistook the routine for reality. 18 years passed like a background process on a computer. Lydia grew into a young woman with my sense of humor and someone else's eyes. Hannah grew accustomed to the comfort I provided. I grew into the shape the role demanded, a man defined entirely by what he could provide. On the night before her senior year started, Lydia sat at the kitchen counter eating cereal at midnight. "Dad," she said, staring into the milk, "you'll still come to my games, right? Even if I'm mostly on the bench. I will be there even if you are relegated to the position of official water bottle coordinator," I said. She smiled. "Promise. I promise." It felt like a contract. I signed it without reading the fine print. Looking back, the normalcy wasn't a sign of health. It was an anesthetic. And anesthetics are great. Right up until the moment you wake up in the middle of the surgery and realize the doctor isn't who he says he is. Chapter 3. The Birthday Party from Hell. The part.
Okay, chapter 3 Birthday Party from Hell. I think we're going to get the good part now. Previous ones were not very interesting, I should say.
Party was my idea, which in hindsight felt like volunteering to be the opening act at my own public execution. We set up the backyard with all the visual cues of a milestone event. String lights, folding tables with pastel tablecloths, a banner that said "Congrats, Lydia" in a font chosen by someone who believed optimism could be laminated. The cake was chocolate because Lydia had decided that cocoa was her entire personality and I had never seen a reason to suggest a revision. I had a speech. Of course I had a speech. I had practiced it in the bathroom mirror like a man auditioning for the role of himself. I told the mirror about pride. I had a line about her first day of kindergarten and a joke about how I still didn't understand TikTok, but I respected her commitment to whatever interpretive dance trend she was currently performing. "You've been my greatest adventure," I whispered to the glass. The mirror didn't cry, but it looked supportive. By the time guests arrived, I was in full host mode. I grilled burgers. I smiled at neighbors whose names I only half remembered. I nodded at Lydia's friends, who looked at me like I was a friendly piece of furniture, necessary for the house to function, but not particularly interesting to look at. "Dad," Lydia said, appearing at my elbow, already looking annoyed. "Please don't be weird." "I'm incapable of not being weird," I said, flipping a burger. "It's genetic." She rolled her eyes and drifted back to her friends. They were all orbiting their phones like satellites around a narcissistic sun. Every moment was being documented. The drinks, the string lights, Lydia's face from four slightly different angles, all filtered into the same unrecognizable version of herself. I waited for the moment, the speech moment. I held my cup, cleared my throat, and took a step toward the center of the lawn. That's when Lydia laughed. It wasn't a laugh at something funny. It was the kind of laugh people do when they're performing for an audience. Loud, sharp, designed to draw blood. "Caleb is too ugly to be my real dad," she said to her friends, her voice carrying across the yard with the casual cruelty of someone who believed the world existed solely for her delivery. "My real father is someone else. Someone actually decent looking." The sentence didn't just land, it detonated. The air went quiet in that physical way, like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the suburbs. The grill sizzled, confused. I watched 20 phones lift in unison, a synchronized movement I recognized from concerts and natural disasters. "Lydia," I said, my brain still trying to process the words as a joke that had gone off the rails. "What are you talking about?" She looked at me with a terrifying level of detachment. "You heard me. You're not my biological father. I've known for a year." I waited for Hannah to laugh, or to correct her, or to do anything that suggested this was a teenage performance piece. But Hannah was standing near the patio door, her face a shade of white that suggested the truth was finally clawing its way out of her throat. "Is this true?" I asked Hannah. She didn't look at me. She looked at her shoes. That was the answer. 18 years of my life condensed into a single frame. My daughter looking at me with contempt, my wife looking at the grass, and a ring of glowing rectangles capturing the whole thing in 4K. I felt something in my chest give way. Not a clean break, more like a support beam quietly failing under too much weight. "Okay," I said. My voice sounded calm, the way people sound right before they do something irreversible. "Okay." I don't remember deciding to flip the table. I just remember my hands touching the plastic edge. I remember the chocolate cake lifting into the air like it had always dreamed of flying. I remember the collective gasp of 30 teenagers. The table went over with a crash that felt like an ending. Plates shattered. Someone screamed. Someone else laughed nervously. "Whoa," a kid said, his arm extended, tracking my movement. "This is going viral." Viral. Right. I had just discovered my entire adult life was a long-running misunderstanding, but the real headline was the furniture. "Dad, what is wrong with you?" Lydia shouted, stepping back from the smear of frosting on her shoes. "What's wrong with me?" I said, the sarcasm escaping before the grief could catch it. "I'm just redecorating. Since I don't live here anymore." The party collapsed. Neighbors drifted backward toward their own fences. Friends pretended they had urgent places to be. The banner sagged, now inaccurate in a way that felt personal. I walked inside, grabbed my keys, and drove. I didn't know where. The streets blurred. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Then it buzzed again. It didn't stop. By the time I pulled into a dark parking lot 3 towns away, the internet had done the rest. By morning, I had a nickname, #TableFlipDad. Someone had slowed the video down. Someone had added a Curb Your Enthusiasm soundtrack. The comments were creative in the way only anonymous cruelty can be. "Why is he so ugly, though?" "She's got a point. Bro thought he was the main character." "Imagine paying for 18 years of chocolate cake for a kid that isn't yours." L. No one asked about the 18 years of scraped knees or the college fund I bled for. They only cared about how high the table flew. The internet doesn't care about context. It cares about engagement metrics. My emotional collapse had been flattened into a 3-second reaction clip for people to use when they had a bad day at work. I watched the video once, then turned the phone face down. The party had been meant to celebrate a transition into adulthood. It did, just not the one I'd planned. I had come to give a speech about the beauty of fatherhood. Instead, I had become content. Chapter 4, the explanation nobody asked for.
So, Table flip guy.
That's a weird name.
But I personally feel, times have changed for bad. There was a time when I was a kid, my father never hesitated to teach me a good lesson.
Yes.
My mom never hesitated to teach me a good lesson, and trust me, those lessons were good. We grew up to be fine kids, and I do the same with my kids.
We all, you know, must do something when it is required. When I'm saying,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Something should be done at that very moment. It's not just words, there has to be some actions. All right. Not endorsing anything, guys. Not endorsing anything. Do whatever you want to do. Raise your kids whichever way you want.
The house smelled like chocolate cake that had given up on its life goals. I came back late, after the internet had already done what the internet does, turned my worst hour into a communal hobby. The string lights were still on in the backyard, sagging like they were embarrassed to be associated with what had happened under them. Plates lay shattered where the table had landed. Someone had tried to clean, failed, and given up. It felt appropriate. Hannah was in the kitchen, sitting at the table that hadn't been flipped. There's always one survivor in every disaster. She had her hands folded, the posture of someone preparing to deliver a press statement. "We need to talk," she said, as if we were scheduling a quarterly review. "I've talked enough for one lifetime," I said. I didn't take my shoes off. It felt like I might need to leave quickly again. She inhaled, slow and deliberate. "I never meant for you to find out like that." "Of course not," I said. "You planned to tell me in the sequel. Once the college checks cleared." "That's not fair. I've discovered fairness is more of a suggestion in this household." She winced, which I took as progress. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice dropping into that rehearsed, soft tone she used for HR mediation. "The affair. It didn't mean anything. It was a long time ago. Long enough to be vintage," I said. "Did it come with a certificate of authenticity, or do I just take your word for it?" Her jaw tightened. "You're being cruel." "Cruel," I repeated, weighing the word. "Interesting choice. I'd have gone with statistically reactive, but let's stick with yours." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't know for sure who Lydia's father was. I hoped it was you. I really did." She hesitated, then said it anyway. "It was Trent. From finance. Trent Wilcox." "That's impressive," I said. "Most people narrow it down to two options pretty quickly. Was there a third contestant I should be aware of?" "I was scared," she snapped, the HR mask slipping. "I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to ruin the life we were building." "You didn't want to lose the lifestyle," I corrected. "There's a difference. You wanted a man who would wake up at 3 a.m. for a baby that wasn't his, and you knew Trent Wilcox wasn't the guy to do it." She stood up, pacing now. "You don't understand how complicated it was." "I understand the math, Hannah. 2 men, 1 child, 18 years of silence. That's not a complication. That's a long-term investment strategy." She stopped and faced me, her eyes red. "I did what I thought was best for our family." "For our family," I said. "That's a fun way to describe a unilateral decision with permanent consequences." "Did you consult the family when you were weaponizing this truth against me during arguments with an 18-year-old? She exhaled sharply. "You embarrassed Lydia tonight. You made her a meme. You humiliated me," I said. "Publicly. In front of the neighbors. But yes, let's talk about the optics. Let's talk about how the cake hit the grass." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "You're her father," Hannah said finally. It was the sentence she'd been orbiting all night. "Just not biologically," she added, as if a footnote could soften the impact. I said, the word tasting like copper. "So, I'm the honorary title holder? Like a participation trophy with a college fund." She flinched, then her face hardened into something ugly. She looked at me with the kind of pure contempt you usually reserve for a stranger who cut you off in traffic. "You know what? Maybe it's better this way," she spat. "At least Lydia got good-looking DNA from someone else. No offense, Caleb, but look at you. You're basically a real-life, uglier version of Shrek." I blinked. The insult was so petty, so wildly unnecessary, that it actually bridged the gap between tragedy and comedy. "Wow," I said. "We're doing fantasy creatures now? Is Trent Wilcox the Prince Charming in this scenario? Does he come with a horse, or just a 401k? She crossed her arms, undeterred. "You can't deny it. You're not exactly leading man material. You're just the guy who stayed." "The guy who stayed," I repeated. Tragic. I was aiming for dependable husband, but I guess I landed on background extra. She scoffed and turned away. The escalation had nowhere left to go. She had chosen mockery as her last defense. the emotional equivalent of throwing sand in my eyes so she could run away. I nodded slowly. Okay, okay, she repeated, looking back. Okay, I said. We're done here. The subscription is canceled. I walked past her, out of the kitchen, down the hallway that was lined with framed photos of a family that had been an 18-year dress rehearsal. I stopped in front of the mirror near the coat rack. I looked at myself. The internet had freeze-framed me at my absolute worst angle. But the man in the mirror just looked tired. A little older. Still solid. Nope, I whispered to my reflection. I look fine. I leaned closer, inspecting the lines around my eyes like they were part of a crime scene. I'm still better looking than Homer Simpson, I muttered. And that guy's got 3 kids who actually share his blood. It was a stupid comparison. It worked anyway. Are you talking to yourself now? Hannah called from the kitchen. Yes, I shouted back. It's the only conversation in this house that isn't trying to rewrite history. I grabbed my jacket and opened the front door. The night air felt clean, the way air feels when you've finally stepped out of a room full of carbon monoxide. Behind me, the house remained full of words that didn't mean anything anymore. Chapter 5, Paperwork, Tests, and the Price of Reality.
Right now, this is a question for the audience here. How many of you think that Marge Simpsons is one of the hottest women on television? I think so.
In the days after I became a meme, I didn't rage, bargain, or plead. I filled out forms. Grief, it turned out, could be scheduled between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. if you had the right stationery. Mr. Grayson's office smelled like lemon cleaner and quiet authority. It was the kind of place where emotions went to be processed into manageable files. He shook my hand with the professional firmness of a man who had built a career on the wreckage of other people's optimism. My name is Martin Grayson, he said, settling behind a desk that probably cost more than my first 2 cars combined. I solve problems. I nodded. I seem to have collected a few. Mostly in the my entire life is a typo category. He didn't laugh. He just slid a legal pad toward me. Let's inventory the damage. We spent the next hour reducing 18 years of marriage to bullet points. Asset lists. Account numbers. Dates. The language was precise in the way medical charts are, describing the trauma without acknowledging the pain. Grounds, he asked, pen poised. Fraud, I said. Long-term. High yield. Professional grade. He almost smiled. We'll go with irreconcilable differences. It's the legal version of everything is on fire and I'm out of water. What about paternity fraud? I asked. I feel like 18 years of subsidizing someone else's DNA warrants more than a polite, we don't get along anymore. Grayson leaned back, his chair creaking with the weight of 1,000 similar tragedies. In the eyes of the law, Caleb, paternity fraud is a ghost. It's hard to prosecute, harder to get damages for, and usually just serves to drag the case into a 3-year swamp of misery. If we go for fraud, we're fighting a war. If we go for irreconcilable differences with a side of decoupling assets, we're performing a surgical strike. So she gets away with it? In the moral sense? No. The internet has already convicted her, Grayson said, gesturing to a tablet on his desk where a #TableFlipDad remix was playing on loop. But in the financial sense, we use the DNA results to shut down spousal support and child obligations before she can even say alimony. We don't call it fraud in the filing. We call it material misrepresentation of marital facts. It's the same thing, but it sounds like a boring accounting error. Judges love boring. I looked at the paperwork. Material misrepresentation. My life wasn't a lie. It was just a poorly audited balance sheet. Exactly, Grayson said, tapping his pen. Now, let's talk about the college fund. Since you're technically a legal stranger to the beneficiary now, we have some very creative ways to claw that back. The filing was efficient and emotionally bloodless. I had expected the end of my marriage to feel like a tragedy. Instead, it felt like canceling a cable subscription that had been overcharging me for channels I never watched. You'll want a formal paternity test, Mr. Grayson said, not looking up. I don't doubt the girl, I said. Her delivery was persuasive. Documentation matters, Mr. Morrison. Truth doesn't count in a courtroom until it's notarized. Hannah was served at her office. I didn't witness it, but the grapevine in Chicago is small, efficient, and fueled by the suffering of others. Apparently, an HR director being served with divorce papers and a court-ordered paternity mandate is the kind of entertainment that makes people forget they have billable hours to log. According to the stories that filtered back to me, she didn't just take it poorly. She treated the process server like he was a glitch in her carefully curated reality. He had barely cleared his throat before Hannah started screaming at him with the kind of volume usually reserved for high-speed chases. The man tried to explain he was just the messenger. It didn't matter. She followed him down the hallway, her heels clicking a frantic war drum against the polished marble, demanding to know who had authorized his entry and threatening to personally oversee the termination of the entire security staff. The server eventually bolted. He literally ran for the elevators. One witness claimed he clipped a decorative ficus on his way out, leaving a trail of soil and shattered dignity behind him. But the timing, that was the icing on the cake. She had been in the middle of leading a mandatory corporate seminar. The topic? Emotional regulation and professional boundaries in the modern workspace. The irony was so sharp it could have drawn blood. 30 employees sat frozen in their ergonomic chairs, watching their director of human resources lose every ounce of her own humanity in real time. They weren't sure whether to take notes on her demonstration of a boundary violation or quietly start updating their LinkedIn profiles. One intern reportedly tried to hide behind a whiteboard. No one dared to ask if the session would be rescheduled or if the Q&A portion was still happening. By the time security actually showed up, the training room was a tomb. The server was gone, the regulation slides were still glowing on the projector, and Hannah's reputation had been officially filed under brand risk. In the corporate world, you can be a lot of things: greedy, incompetent, even cruel, but you can't be a liability. HR people are supposed to be the ones who hold the clipboard during the fire. They aren't supposed to be the ones pouring the gasoline. I heard she spent the rest of the day locked in her office. I spent it wondering if she'd finally realized that some administrative errors can't be fixed with a follow-up email. Yes, absolutely. Having Hannah try to block the test adds to her HR manager trying to suppress evidence vibe and makes the judge's eventual intervention feel like a much-needed win for Caleb. It also highlights her desperation. She knows the truth is a nuclear bomb, and she's trying to keep the pin in. The matter landed in court with the efficiency of gravity. We weren't there for a final ruling yet, just the preliminary motions, but the air in the room felt heavy, like a storm front moving in. Hannah sat with her lawyer, a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of a block of ice and dressed in a power suit. I sat with Mr. Grayson, who was calmly sharpening a pencil as if he were preparing for a duel. When Grayson moved for a court-ordered paternity test, Hannah's lawyer stood up so fast her chair screeched against the linoleum. "Your Honor, this is an unnecessary intrusion into the sanctity of an 18-year parental bond," she argued, her voice projecting the kind of fake moral outrage you buy by the hour. To subject a young woman to such a traumatic procedure based on let's call it a disagreement at a birthday party, is nothing short of harassment. Caleb Morrison has been the father of record since birth. Biology is secondary to the emotional reality. Hannah nodded along, looking like a martyr who had been unfairly accused of being human. Judge Randall Keene leaned over his bench, peering at them over a pair of reading glasses that looked like they'd seen 1,000 lies and weren't impressed by any of them. He looked at Hannah, then at the viral video clip Grayson had quietly submitted as Exhibit A. "A disagreement, counselor?" the judge asked, his voice a dry gravel. The young woman in question literally announced to a backyard full of people that Mr. Morrison wasn't her father. It's hard to argue for the sanctity of a bond when the beneficiary of that bond is the one who took a sledgehammer to it on TikTok. It was teenage angst. "Your Honor," the lawyer countered. A heat-of-the-moment comment. The judge sighed, the sound of a man who had reached his limit for corporate speak in a judicial setting. He scribbled something on a pad and looked directly at Hannah. "We're going to do the test," Keene said, his tone final. "Not because I want to traumatize anyone, but because I'm a fan of clarity. If Mr. Morrison is the father, we move on. If he isn't, we have a material misrepresentation on our hands. Consider it a just-in-case scenario." Hannah's face didn't just fall, it evaporated. She looked at the judge like he'd just canceled her favorite show mid-season. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when something obvious is about to be made official. Hannah didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. We both stared at our respective tables like they might offer us a plea deal that wasn't coming. "Clarity," Grayson whispered to me as we stood to leave. "It's the one thing she can't spin." The results came back 2 weeks later. It wasn't the kind of news you celebrate with balloons. The paper confirmed what my nervous system already knew. Biology did not back my emotional investment. My DNA was nowhere near the crime scene. I updated my will that afternoon. I removed Lydia from my life insurance and the college fund I had been feeding like a sacred cow for almost 2 decades. The numbers on the screen adjusted themselves with mechanical indifference. The system didn't care why I was reallocating resources. It only cared that I had the authority to hit delete. I stayed with my brother, Mike. His apartment smelled like frozen pizza, old gym socks, and misplaced optimism. When I reached his door, I didn't even have to knock. He flung it open, holding 2 cold bottles of beer like they were holy relics. He took one look at my face, haggard, shell-shocked, and still sporting a faint smear of chocolate frosting on my sleeve, and his face split into a wide, unapologetic grin. Holy smokes, Mike barked, letting out a jagged laugh. If it isn't table flip dad himself. Man, you really got some air on that cake. The physics were incredible. I stood there for a second, the weight of the last 48 hours pressing down on my shoulders. I should have been angry, but hearing the ridiculousness of it out loud from someone who actually gave a damn about me broke the tension. A dry, rusty chuckle escaped my throat. I think I pulled a latissimus dorsi on the follow-through, I muttered. Worth it, Mike said, still grinning. He stepped forward and pulled me into a rib-crushing bear hug. Come here, you ugly ogre. The moment his arms wrapped around me, the sarcasm evaporated. The table flip dad, jokes, the legal armor, and the clinical detachment I'd been using to stay upright just dissolved. My breath hitched, and before I could stop it, I was shaking. I buried my face in his shoulder and finally, mercifully, broke down. I didn't just cry, I grieved. I grieved for 18 years of bedtime stories that felt like lies, for a marriage that was a long-term embezzlement scheme, and for the girl who looked me in the eye and told me I was too ugly to love. Mike didn't say anything. He didn't offer platitudes or tell me it would be okay. He just stood there, solid as a rock, holding me up while I fell apart in the doorway of a messy apartment in Chicago. After a few minutes, he gave me a final, heavy pat on the back and steered me toward the couch. He handed me a beer, the glass cold against my palm. Drink, he said, his voice dropping the edge and becoming uncharacteristically gentle. The cause of and solution to all life's problems. That's a Homer Simpson quote, Mike. It's scientifically unsound. He sat down next to me, kicking a stray pizza box out of the way. So are feelings, Caleb. So are feelings. We sat in silence for a long time, watching a nature documentary about lions with the volume turned low. I watched a cub get left behind by the pride and felt a strange, bitter kinship with the lioness who just kept walking. You know, I said, my voice still thick after the third beer. You're starting to look like him. He frowned. Who? The lion. Homer, I said. The yellow guy? You've got the vibe. The denial. The beer-based philosophy. You're just missing the white polo and the 3 biological children. He stared at me, then let out a soft laugh. You're drunk. I'm observational, I said, pointing a finger at him. There's a difference. He's a cartoon, but he's got more skin in the game than I do. He's the real deal. I'm just a guest star in a sitcom that got canceled for low ratings. He took the bottle from my hand before I could drop it. Go to sleep, Caleb. Tomorrow you can be sarcastic at the sun. Today, you just get to be my baby brother. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I wasn't anyone's father or anyone's husband. I was just a guy on a lumpy couch, and for now, that was enough. The confrontation with Lydia happened the next morning. She showed up at Mike's place with a face that had clearly practiced righteous outrage in the rearview mirror. She didn't knock. She entered like she still owned the keys to my soul, or at least the pin to my ATM. You can't just cut me off, she said, standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by Mike's empty pizza boxes. My tuition is due in 3 weeks. I can, I said, leaning against the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee that was as bitter as I was. It turns out that when you delete the father file, the tuition subfolder goes with it. It's a clean uninstall. You're punishing me for mom's mistakes. I'm declining to subsidize a lie, I said. There's a difference. I spent 18 years paying for the deluxe subscription to fatherhood. I'm transitioning to the not my problem plan. It's much more affordable. You were my dad, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. It was a good performance. A year ago, it would have brought me to my knees. I was the man who showed up, I replied. The man who stayed. I was the guy who sat through every off-key recital and every mind-numbing parent-teacher conference. But you made it very clear at that party that those things don't matter compared to good DNA. So, I'm letting the DNA take over the payments. It's only fair. She crossed her arms, her lip trembling. You're abandoning me. I'm not abandoning you, Lydia. I'm giving you a pathway to the person you said you wanted. Go find Trent Wilcox from finance. Tell him your tuition is due. Tell him about your good-looking DNA. Maybe he'll find it as valuable as I found your loyalty. She flinched at the name. She stood there for a long moment, waiting for me to cave, waiting for the dad reflex, that biological urge to protect her from the consequences of her own mouth, to kick in and make everything okay. It didn't. That version of me had died in the backyard next to a flipped table and a ruined chocolate cake. She turned and left without another word. The door didn't slam. It just clicked shut, which felt much more permanent. After she was gone, I sat on the couch and stared at the blank television. Legal closure was clean. It came with stamps, notary seals, and enforceable boundaries. Emotional closure was messier. It didn't come with instructions. It just left the room a few degrees colder than it used to be. I realized then that I didn't mind the cold. It was the first honest thing I'd felt in years. Chapter 6. Courtroom, but make it content.
So the point is that this dad, just
Table flipping guy who
yeah,
looks like Shrek.
yeah, or the guy who looks like Shrek. I don't know if he looks like Shrek, but he said, that it was a bad angle that went viral. But my thing here is, you know, when you have been betrayed by people closest to you, everyone reacts in many ways. Some will react the way he reacted, flip the table. Some might
Yes.
not even react. Some might just walk out. And right now, things have gone to court. Things have taken different turns. Now he has decided to cut ties. And, honestly, I will never blame him for it. And I think that's his way of expressing his anger. That's how it is.
It's totally depend on the person, whatever he decides.
Whatever he decides, that's fine. But I would not have taken the daughter back. She was
Yes.
actually the catalyst of this entire thing. If she had kept her mouth shut, I don't know if things might have, this dad might have never known things. He might have been paying for it. It was good for him that she talked.
Yes. It
She
was.
talked, he got out of it. Otherwise, he would still be paying. Any which ways, let's go ahead.
The court process dragged on for months, but the first rulings came fast enough to change everything. Courtrooms have a specific smell. It's a mix of old paper, industrial disinfectant, and the faint, metallic hope that rules still mean something. I noticed it the moment I sat down, as if my brain was trying to convince me this place had gravity. Gravity implies dignity. Dignity implies limits. I took a seat beside Mr. Grayson, who had arranged his files into a stack so neat it suggested competence was an aesthetic choice. Today is procedural, he murmured, not looking at me. Don't perform. I'm tired of performing, I said. Good, he replied. Let the facts do the talking. They're louder anyway. Across the aisle, Hannah sat with her attorney. Hannah's posture was composed. Her face set in the expression she used at the office when delivering bad news with a polite smile. I wondered if she'd practiced this professional martyr face in the mirror. Judge Randall Keene entered. Let's proceed, he said, his voice a dry rasp. Hannah's attorney spoke first. She framed the marriage as a partnership built on sacrificial labor. She used words like financial dependence and career concessions, as if betrayal were just a line item that could be amortized over a 20-year period. She gave up opportunities, the attorney said. She prioritized the family unit. She is entitled to spousal support commensurate with her nearly 2 decades of domestic contribution. I watched Hannah nod faintly, like a customer approving a sales pitch for a car she already knew was stolen. Mr. Grayson stood up slowly. Your Honor, he said, we'll stipulate that my client's spouse made choices during the marriage. We'll also demonstrate that she made choices outside of it. The latter materially changes the calculus of contribution. The courtroom shifted into its listening posture. Chairs creaked. Someone in the back coughed twice. Grayson introduced the emails. They were years-old messages between Hannah and Trent Wilcox, dressed up as harmless workplace check-ins. Birthday wishes, holiday pleasantries, the kind of contact people describe as nothing when they're trying to keep their lives from leaking. Then he read the line that ended the game. Lydia's eyes look more like yours every year. It's getting harder to pretend. Hannah's attorney objected, citing privacy. The judge overruled before she could finish the sentence. Grayson continued, detailing how Hannah had suspected the truth for years while allowing me to invest every cent and every ounce of my identity into a fiction. Hannah's narrative fractured. Her claims of uncertainty evaporated under the weight of her own scent folder. She tried to pivot back to fear, to the idea that she was protecting the family. Judge Keene took notes in small, precise handwriting, cataloging her excuses like they were expired coupons. When the arguments concluded, he looked up, his gaze settling on Hannah. Ms. Morrison, he said, your omissions were not incidental. They were sustained. This court cannot reward a decade and a half of calculated deception by mandating support from the party whose consent was fundamentally compromised. He denied spousal support. In full. For a moment, the system did exactly what it was designed to do. Accountability occurred. The room exhaled. I felt lighter in the way people do after setting down a heavy box they didn't realize they'd been carrying for years. Outside the courtroom, the gravity dissipated instantly. I stood near the exit, checking my phone out of habit. Mr. Grayson shook my hand with a look of quiet triumph. Clean outcome, Caleb. About as clean as these things get. Clean, I repeated. That's one way to put it. Then Judge Keene appeared beside me, having shed his robes. He looked suddenly informal, which felt almost illegal. Mr. Morrison, he said, reaching into his pocket. Can I get a quick photo? I stared at him. The man who had just dismantled my marriage was holding a smartphone with a cracked screen. Why? I asked, my voice flat. He looked slightly sheepish, but didn't lower the phone. My daughter. She's been following the hashtag #TableFlipDad tag since the party. She told me if I didn't get a picture with the man himself, I was a failure as a father. Your daughter watches videos of men having their lives destroyed in public for fun? I asked. He shrugged, a small, cynical smile on his face. She's 18, Mr. Morrison. Everything is content to them. We took the photo. I didn't smile. The camera didn't care. By the time I reached my car, the image was already trending. Judge Randall Keene had posted it with the caption, #TableFlipDad got justice today. The post gained traction the way garbage gains flies. It was flooded with comments from people who hadn't been in the room, hadn't read the emails, and hadn't felt the coldness of the kitchen the night before. Redemption arc of the century, one comment read. Justice system actually worked for once, said another. The judge is a legend for this. My legal vindication had been flattened into a meme. The courtroom had been a set. The judge had become a collaborator in the very influencer culture that had mocked me. Even justice, it seemed, needed engagement metrics to feel real. I set my phone on the dashboard and stared at the steering wheel. Gravity had lasted exactly as long as the ruling. After that, it was just more noise. Chapter 7, The Biological Father DLC, not included.
In real life, do you think judges would do that? I don't think so.
Yes,
Obviously, this is a fictional story, just to remind people.
we'll take it like that.
We'll take it like that. But I would like to meet this judge who takes pictures with the
Table flipping guy.
table flipping dad. Not guy, dad.
Yeah, dad.
You're mistaking it. All right, let's
Trent
go ahead.
Wilcox called me on a Tuesday afternoon. It felt appropriate. Tuesdays are where bad news goes when it wants to avoid the theatricality of a Monday. I almost let it ring out. Unknown numbers had become a genre of threat lately. Usually reporters or teenagers looking for a quote from the table flip guy. But I answered. I did it with the emotional readiness of a man bracing for a robocall about a car warranty I never asked for. Caleb Morrison? The voice asked. Depends on who's asking, I said, and whether you're recording this for a podcast. My name is Trent Wilcox. He stopped, as if he'd forgotten the rest of his script. I think we should meet. There it was. The sentence people use when they want to hand you their emotional luggage in a public place. I don't usually meet strangers who participated in the unauthorized redesign of my family, I said. It confuses my calendar. I know, he said quickly, and I deserve that. Hannah showed up at my office last week. With Lydia. In the lobby. I don't think you should hear what happened from anyone but me. The words sat there, heavy and oddly polite. I pictured Hannah storming into a high-rise office, demanding destiny from a receptionist. Coffee, I said. Neutral ground. If you start a monologue, I'm leaving. We picked a shop downtown that specialized in expensive foam and quiet regret. It was the kind of place where people brought laptops to feel productive about their despair. I arrived early. Waiting feels like control when you don't have any. The barista slid me a cup without asking. Medium black? I look like I've earned it, I replied. Trent walked in 5 minutes late, scanning the room like he expected to be tackled by a process server. He looked exactly like a man who had practiced an apology in the rearview mirror and decided to pivot to damage control halfway through. Tall, clean cut. He had the kind of face that recruiters trust and HR departments protect. Caleb, he said, extending a hand, and then retracting it when he realized how deeply weird the gesture was. Let's skip the choreography, I said, gesturing to the chair. Sit. He sat. We stared at our coffees like they were going to mediate the settlement. I'm sorry, he said immediately. For all of it. That's ambitious, I said. Let's start with the parts you actually had a hand in. He nodded, looking chastened. I knew there was a chance Lydia was mine. Hannah hinted. Over the years. The emails you saw? Those weren't accidents. That tracks, I said. You don't compliment a child's eyes for 18 years without suspecting you donated the blueprint. He flinched. I told myself it wasn't certain. I told myself it was better to stay away than complicate her life. So you had an affair with my wife, I said, suspected the kid was yours, and decided your contribution would be strategic absence. I didn't want to blow up your family, he said weakly. You still did, I said. You just outsourced the blast radius to me. He took a breath, his hands shaking slightly. Last Tuesday, she bypassed security at my firm. walked into the lobby with Lydia, announced it was time I stepped up and fulfilled my biological obligations. Did she bring a PowerPoint? I asked, because that's usually how she sells life-altering decisions. He winced. It was public. She said I had a responsibility to my true daughter. And you said? I said I'm married, Caleb. I have 2 kids under 10. I can't just download fatherhood for a college student I've never met. I didn't consent to any of this. Consent is trending, I said, leaning back. You should have tried it 19 years ago, both with my wife and with the consequences. He swallowed. My wife found out. I raised an eyebrow. And she filed for divorce, he said. She wants full custody. She's talking about taking the house, the accounts, everything. I laughed. It surprised both of us. That serves you right, I said. You don't get to sleep with someone else's wife, dodge the fallout for 18 years, and then act shocked when the bill arrives with interest. His face collapsed inward. I didn't think it would destroy my life. I didn't think mine would implode on a Tuesday in front of a cake, I said. We all have blind spots. Silence settled between us. It wasn't hostile. It was empty. 2 men comparing different versions of ruin. I'm not stepping into a father role, he said quietly. I know, I said. That department is closed. There's no position to fill. I've retired from the industry. He stood, fumbling with his wallet, left a few bills on the table. The universal gesture of a man apologizing to furniture. I hope you're okay, he said. I'm operational, I said. That's as close as I get. I stood up before he could say anything else. Closure is just a word people use when they want to leave first. As I walked out, I felt something loosen in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It was symmetry. Hannah's method hadn't changed. When truth arrived, redirect the responsibility to the nearest male-shaped surface. The only difference was that now, the surfaces were collapsing. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, I stopped paying for other people's lies. Chapter 8. Everyone loses, just at different speeds.
If you look at this in a very, unbiased, neutral phase, I would say, you know, Hannah now wants money. Right now, why would you want a father figure for an 18-year-old? That person is already an adult. You don't, mold them into anything else. This is only and only done, to get money
Get
for
money.
college,
Yeah.
for college funds, nothing else. Maybe some spousal support. Expensive for an affair. Let's go ahead.
Consequences didn't arrive like a storm. They arrived like the mail. Thin envelopes, awkward silences, doors that used to open without friction suddenly requiring a background check. Hannah's collapse was purely administrative, the kind of disaster that doesn't make the evening news but ruins your LinkedIn profile. Word traveled through her office the way gossip always does, faster than official memos, slower than the truth. The HR director who had lost her mind in a glass-walled hallway now found her meetings postponed. Trainings were rescheduled without her. Her calendar thinned out until it was just a series of blank white boxes. The company didn't fire her right away. They did something more corporate. They stopped trusting her with anything that required a pulse. I'm being sidelined, she told me in a text I didn't answer. Projects reassigned. My leadership development path is on hold. Leadership development. The phrase felt aspirational in a way that bordered on satire. You can't develop leadership in someone who treats 18 years of marriage like a shell company. Trent vanished next. The call stopped. The emails went into the void. The legal threats Hannah floated met a wall of high-priced silence. Trent retreated into the architecture of specialized lawyers and marital damage control, sealing himself behind restraining orders like a man boarding up windows before a hurricane he'd helped summon. Lydia deferred her college admission. The letter arrived with the soft, cushioned language of institutions that don't want to admit they aren't built to absorb personal implosions. We encourage you to reapply next cycle. It was consequence dressed up as encouragement. She moved in with a friend whose parents pretended not to notice the extra mouth at the table. DNA, it turned out, did not come with a meal plan or a housing stipend. I watched all of this from a distance that felt entirely intentional. I didn't intervene. I didn't comment. I was learning to read the shape of absence as my primary form of participation. The family we had performed for years didn't shatter into 1,000 pieces. It thinned, like paint worn away by bad weather. The edges of our former life peeled back quietly. Shared routines evaporated. Holidays became logistics. Birthdays became calendar entries I learned to scroll past without flinching. Once, I passed Hannah in the cereal aisle of the grocery store. We nodded like former colleagues who had nothing left to litigate. "Hi." she said, her voice sounding small between the granola and the sugar loops. Hi, I replied. We both stared at a box of bran like it had filed for Swiss neutrality. She started to say something, maybe a final jab about Shrek, maybe a genuine apology, but she stopped. The pause hung between us, full of words that had expired months ago. Take care, she said. Yeah, I said, because politeness is the only thing that outlives affection. Lydia texted me once. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a request. It was just a link to an apartment listing near her campus with the caption, "It's expensive." I stared at the glowing screen until it dimmed and went black. Then I set the phone face down on the counter. Consequences rarely come with satisfying speeches or cinematic closures. They come with uncomfortable silences and the unspoken expectation that you will fill the void with your checkbook. The narrative that had once bound us, husband, wife, daughter, expired without ceremony. No dramatic music, no courtroom gavel, just a slow, administrative fade-out. Assets divided, schedules erased, contacts removed, emotional leftovers boxed up and labeled "Do Not Open." People asked me if it felt like justice. It didn't. Justice implies a return to balance. This just felt like gravity doing its job. I learned to live in the quieter aftermath. Mornings without obligations. Evenings without the need for explanations. The world didn't reward my detachment. It simply made room for it. Everyone lost. We just lost at different speeds. And speed, it turned out, was the only thing that separated a tragedy from a very long pile of paperwork. Chapter 9. The Medieval Apology and the Bachelor Rebrand.
This is a question not just for you, but also for a lot of our subscribers who are listening to this. Have you ever met your ex like he met, in a grocery store suddenly in front of you?
Well, this question is not apt for me because I've met many of my exes, and they
He's a
ask me a
bad boy. He's a bad,
and
bad
they ask me
boy.
like different set of questions. Not like him, but
I'm going to ask Rohit to cut a clip
Mhm.
out of this and send it to your wife. I'm gonna do that, and Rohit is actually giving me a thumbs up. But a question for all of you guys as well: Have you ever met your ex in a grocery aisle like this? I have never met any of my exes. I mean, I never had an ex.
this is only for recording, not a reality.
Nobody can cut this into a clip and send to my wife. All right, let's go ahead.
By the time the letter arrived, the internet had already found someone new to humiliate. My phone no longer vibrated with strangers telling me I was brave, broken, or ugly in 3 different fonts. Hashtag TableFlipDad had been archived under content that once made people feel something for 8 seconds. I had returned to being a man-shaped outline in public spaces, which felt like a significant promotion. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a relic. Actual paper, a stamp. Someone had gone out of their way to perform sincerity in a medium best known for bills and court notices. I picked it up with the mild curiosity usually reserved for museum artifacts. Lydia's handwriting filled the page. It was careful and earnest, the kind of script that suggested she wanted to be taken seriously. She wrote about fear. She claimed she'd been terrified that I would hate her if I wasn't really her father. She argued that she had pushed me away first so she wouldn't have to experience the agony of being left. The words were arranged neatly, like an apology that had been proofread by guilt and polished for a grade. I read the first paragraph, then the second. I waited for something in my chest to respond. A spark of the old dad reflex, a twinge of the man who used to carry her on his shoulders. Nothing happened. The signal was dead. The apology had arrived too late and in the wrong format. I had moved past the stage where stationery could carry the weight of 18 years of silence. If she had sent a smoke signal, I might have been equally unmoved. The emotional economy had shifted. Handwritten remorse now felt like cosplay. I folded the letter once, cleanly, and dropped it into the trash can. Is there a carrier pigeon scheduled next? I muttered to the empty kitchen. Or are we upgrading to a messenger owl? Instead of replying to the letter, I picked up my phone and typed a single sentence to the number I hadn't yet blocked. Try someplace else. I'm too ugly to give a damn. I didn't reread it. I hit send. The cruelty wasn't the point. Finality was. Closure, I had learned, was not an emotional event. It was an administrative decision. With the last thread of obligation severed, I turned to the logistics of the house. I had kept the property in the divorce, not because I loved the architecture, but because I wanted to reclaim the territory. The place had been curated for a family that no longer existed. Soft furniture, framed photos, The subtle tyranny of throw pillows that demanded gentleness. I removed the photos first. It felt less like erasing memories and more like canceling a subscription I no longer used. The walls brightened. The rooms breathed. The silence shifted from accusatory to neutral. I remodeled with ceremonial precision. Clean lines, hard surfaces, furniture that did not invite confession or cozy family meetings. The house became a bachelor pad not because I wanted decadence, but because I wanted control. Nothing in it asked me to remember the man who had been fooled for 2 decades. I bought a cruiser motorcycle because movement felt honest. No destination, just the mechanical ability to leave without an explanation. The first time I rode it, the city blurred into something manageable. Wind doesn't judge, it just happens. I also adopted a German shepherd from a shelter. The volunteer described him as loyal, wary, and deeply unimpressed by strangers. I respected the branding immediately. I named him Buster. He followed me from room to room without commentary, a presence that did not reinterpret my past or demand emotional negotiations. We shared a silent understanding. We were both done with unreliable attachments. The viral attention dissolved the way all attention does, without apology. My humiliation became archived content, occasionally resurfacing in someone's algorithm like a bad dream you can't quite remember. I noticed the silence that followed. It wasn't exactly peace, but it was stability. Stability felt like a room where nothing was actively on fire. Mornings became rides. Evenings became walks with Buster. Meals became quiet affairs without the background noise of teenage sarcasm or marital tension. The house no longer pretended to be a family home. It was a controlled environment for a man who had learned that curation was the only way to survive. The story didn't end with a grand gesture of forgiveness. It ended with a quiet withdrawal. The internet curated humiliation. I curated absence. My world was smaller now, but it was finally built on something that wasn't a lie.
All right, I think that's the end of the story here. Um, and okay, now here's something I would like to say about the internet, especially on this being viral and all. Getting viral nowadays is a very absurd situation. I was on internet, just a day back, and I saw this Instagram account. Uh, it had 7 posts and over 1.1 million followers.
No.
Now, what happens in that is there's this guy who has this toy, and he says, for every subscriber gained, I would throw this toy from the height of 1 millimeter per subscriber until he reaches Burj Al Khalifa. So he actually did that on the sixth post. 6 posts, and he had over 800,000 subscribers. And then he took a helicopter to throw this toy from that height, and now they are planning to do it from the space. Now that is something weird. I don't know what pleasure people get from watching a toy being thrown from a height. That being said, we have been working on a story that features the lawyers, Mr. Martin Grayson versus the man who dresses like a hitman and works as a DJ on weekends. So it's going to be a lawyer versus lawyer.
Lawyer.
And I think this was something which people wanted to see. And I have had so many comments wherein they wanted to see the lawyer versus lawyer storyline. And we are finally doing that. And we will be doing that pretty soon. Maybe by the end of next week, we will be ready with it. And we will be publishing it by next week. But it will be on Patreon, not here. We cannot have the hitman lawyer on YouTube. We cannot have him here. And apart from that, Ben and Kathy's story will be live within this week. Avinash is already editing that story, and I think he'll be ready with it within this week. And we will be releasing it this week on Patreon once again. The hitman lawyer is in that story as well. So that's how it is. And apart from that, if you have any suggestions for our content, please let us know in the comment section below. Also, we have been planning to do something different on this channel, and maybe we do it by next week. Maybe a week after that. But very, very soon we will be doing something different. And I hope you will enjoy it as much as we do working on it. With that being said, if you are new to this channel, please like, share, and subscribe.
And
And
do
if
check out our Patreon page.
and do check out our Patreon page, as my friend said. And have a nice day.